Avowed is a big departure from Obsidian and Bethesda style RPGs, because it not only lacks romance, but also another staple of these games: factions. Factions are normally intended to provide incentive for replays so you can see all of a game's endings, which are usually tied to these groups. But by eschewing these traditions, Avowed is able to craft a world that feels much more personal and allows for players to adopt a more malleable philosophy. See, when doing a faction playthrough in these titles, the player is often required to adopt that faction's moral code and rigid belief structure, because the motivation for joining the faction is for them to succeed and for you to see the end of the storyline. So annoying a faction by betraying them would be a waste of time on the player's part. But this in turn neuters role-playing, as you stop making the choices that you think are right and are forced to make the decisions that would make your superiors happy. It also doesn't help that factions in games often fall into two distinct archetypes that represent order versus chaos, and ends up reducing complex choices down to good versus evil. But by removing factions from Avowed, Obsidian has crafted their most intimate game yet, whilst retaining the wide-reaching effects your choices have on the world. This is supported by the chapter-like structure of Avowed, which has you move across the living lands region by region. This means that the pivotal choices you have to make in each zone are often represented by two different parties, as the people in that area have different values and morals to the previous ones. Of course, there is the ever-present Steel Garrote, which sadly falls into the orderly but oppressive archetype that's been overdone in RPGs, but many choices, like when to send the residents of Fiormes and Verno, has you choosing to side with NPCs from the same faction who just have dissenting opinions. Making this even better is the fact that you don't know these NPCs all that well, ensuring that your decision comes exclusively from you. Well, that's not entirely true. Every major choice in the game will present you with the option to consult your companions and letting you see what their personal philosophy is. In this way, the companions could take the place of factions as you work to try and satisfy them with your decisions. But Avowed has no romance options or even approval mechanics, so you have no gameplay or story incentive to listen to one particular party member, as you can never have a happy ending with them. So by offering you no reason to side with a particular person, group, or ideology, the burden of choice is directly on the player. This gives your choices more weight, as you can't justify selfish choices with reasoning like, well, I'm going for this ending and these guys are evil, so I have to be evil too. The onus is solely on you and what your vision for the living land should be. And with your companions merely serving as a guide on what your choice should be, it allows for a far more individualistic perspective, as your companions are all deliberately outcasts or former members of factions, meaning that their philosophy isn't intertwined with the collective interest of their group. See, Mass Effect had many party members who only had their race at heart, and their opinions often only benefited furthering the interests of their species, mimicking the political power struggle that had gripped the galaxy. This is why Mordin and Garrus are the two best party members in the trilogy, because their character arcs involve breaking away from their factions, and they don't encourage further political division. In the same way, your Avowed party members don't have their opinions tied to a group, and will often have a far more nuanced perspective when you seek their counsel, allowing the game to break away from us versus them style conflicts that have plagued so many choice-based games. This is further reflected in the game's decision to only allow you to play as two races, elf and human. This means that not only can you not join a faction, you also can't sympathize with any of the races, which could lead you to form a kinship with one of your companions and be inclined to agree with only one of them. What's more is that the player is also forced into being a godlike, making them a wholly unique individual in the entirety of the living lands. So by forcefully separating the player from everyone else in the game world, it makes it extremely difficult for the player to become immediately attached to any group based on tribalism. To me, Avowed is taking advantage of its smaller scope and budget to critique aspects found in larger RPGs, like how the faction systems and overabundance of character customization shows just how much of a player's choices in a game are fueled by identity politics. And by removing any and all reasons to be predisposed to a particular persuasion, Avowed is able to put all the weight of its choices purely on the player's moral conscience, refusing to let them limit themselves to winning over a particular companion or faction, and forcing them to confront what they would actually choose. For more Avowed essays, here's one going more in depth on the personal philosophies of each companion, and I'll be back in 2 days.